Well, while the war on the coronavirus depends heavily on non-pharmaceutical interventions, we also know that pharmaceutical interventions will certainly be very needed in waging this war, particularly for those who have been infected, and also perhaps to boost the immunity of those who haven't been. Nigeria definitely has an institute to look into this, which is NIPRID, a National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development. And heading that institute is Dr. Obi Adigwe, who is the Director General. Dr. Adigwe, you're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
It's good to be here, Malpa.
Well, there is great expectation around, I don't know, should we say there is great expectation of, but there is great expectation around what is possible, the opportunities that this coronavirus has presented us with. For some, they believe that, it could help us get more health conscious as a people, even though we have experienced something like this in the past. If Ebola easily comes to mind, and, the practices that should have stayed with us didn't, but perhaps because of the prolonged nature of this pandemic, maybe they will stay. On the other hand, they're also hoping that some of our research capabilities will come back to life, which is where your institute comes in. People are looking to your institute to see what is possible from there, largely, especially with herbal medicine. What has happened so far in the wake of the coronavirus, especially within your institute?
Yeah, so you're quite right that there are great expectations. And just to put it in perspective, let's look at the entire ecosystem for interventions that are addressed towards controlling the pandemic. So at the higher level, you have a broad division of pharmaceutical interventions and non-pharmaceutical interventions, which obviously hand washing, mask wearing, and all those other activities fall under. Now, under the pharmaceutical interventions, there are also you could broadly divide it into three major categories. First, you have the vaccines, which has been thoroughly discussed and has been on the table for the past few months based on the new initiatives from the West. But you also have the conventional medicines. Now, these are things like remdesivir. These are things like chloroquine. These are things like other new interventions, or rather other old interventions, which are conventional medicines, which are being either repurposed for COVID-19 or are being put forward for the first time through clinical trials. So that's the second major category. Then you have the phytomedicines, which you mentioned, and that's where a lot of the work that is being done in Africa and in parts of Asia are being put to the fore. So for NIPRID, all the three categories under the pharmaceutical interventions are areas where we've been providing value.
So you're looking at vaccines as well?
Oh, yes, we're looking at vaccines as well. We're looking at vaccines as well because vaccines, as you're aware, is a pharmaceutical product. And so it's within the remit of the National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development to bring forward new interventions, new processes, and new products in that particular broad area.
That is interesting, because only this morning the papers have the story. The federal government has they've released 10 billion naira for local vaccines. Now, we do not know if that's still your institute, or if, because sometimes when they say releases, we don't know if the money has actually been released. And if they have released the money, as it says here, have you received any funds?
Well, that's a question for the Federal Ministry of Health. As you're aware, the National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development is an independent agency which is supervised by the Ministry of Health. So if that is in the papers, it's probably been released to the Federal Ministry of Health. So they're the ones who will be in the best position to answer that question.
But will you be expecting any funds?
Well, what we're doing for vaccines in particular, we're looking at the different areas where we can add value. if you look at the literature that's out there, go on the internet, as far back as 5-6 years ago, we were one of the first that started to propose for local vaccines manufacturing to be taken as a priority. On the 30th of April 2017, I gave an interview to the Guardian newspapers. I followed it up with another interview about 3 months later. And even up until last year, 18th of March, I gave another interview to Farmer News newspaper in Lagos. And they were all geared towards increasing the consciousness for Nigeria to, heighten the prioritization of local vaccines manufacturing. And this was ages before coronavirus even became an issue. The first time we put forward our proposal, it was when Nigeria struggled with meningitis. But these are the lessons, like we were mentioning earlier. Things happen, we seem to learn a lesson, and then when that emergency goes away, we don't carry on. But thankfully, this administration took on board our proposal 4 or 5 years ago, and that was how the Nigerian government now partnered with a local manufacturer to bring forward the biovaccines company, and that's a step in the right direction. Other things that we've done in terms of vaccines is, as you're aware, vaccine hesitancy is a big issue. And we had raised the alarm about vaccines hesitancy a few months ago. In fact, as I'm speaking with you, my officers are in the field undertaking that research. Because now that the West has started receiving vaccines, there is empirical evidence that suggests that in context, in countries, in communities where vaccines hesitancy is high, the rollout of the vaccines is not it's not as optimal as it should be. Take, for instance, France. France has a high level of vaccines hesitancy. And if you're looking at the countries that have done very well in terms of the rollout of vaccines, you have Israel, Bahrain, and UK on the one hand. And on the other hand, countries like France and the US have done very poorly. And vaccines hesitancy has been identified as a variable. So we at NIPRID are trying to identify what the thinking is here in Nigeria, even before the vaccines come on board. So these are the type of research activities that will bring value to the entire vaccine ecosystem when it gets here. But that's not all NIPRID has done. We've done quite a lot of work in terms of conventional medicine. We were one of the first to put together several clinical trial protocols that were aimed at looking at conventional medicines. When things like zinc, hydroxychloroquine, and all those were on board, we developed clinical trials, protocols, and approached partner teaching hospitals to work together with them to look at the effectiveness of these particular products here in Nigeria. But I think
what did you find? Well,
we haven't quite moved as quickly and as in an expeditious manner as expected, and it's because we didn't have the kind of funds we needed to move forward, and those are still on the front burner. We've been approached recently by one of the groups that's looking at ivermectin. That's another conventional medicine that seems to have activity, that we should be looking at.
It's just a little worrying. I mean, when you say you don't have the kind of funds that you need, one would think that, in this sort of season, one of the areas that will be prioritized to be research, and whatever that you need to get going will be given, especially with regards to the pandemic. But just wondering, you've spoken about vaccines to a large extent and your involvement in that. You talked about the conventional medicine, conventional drugs, and then now you're talking about the phytodrugs.
Phytomedicine.
Imagine that's herbal medicine.
Yes.
To what extent will what happened in Madagascar herbal medicine and the blow that suffered, I'm trying to remember the name of the medicine now.
COVID organics.
Exactly. The blow that they suffered, to what extent do you think that could affect whatever it is that you come up with that is herbal here in Nigeria?
Well, incidentally, the first categorical research piece that analyzed the COVID organics which went on to be accepted the world over as the most categorical position was from NIPRID. You know, NIPRID was the first agency that looked at that product across the world, not just in Africa, that looked at that product and said, this product does not do what it claims to do. There are benefits, and you know, we went ahead to identify, even though they weren't, you know, the active ingredients weren't written on the pack. We went ahead to identify, using our fingerprinting technology at NIPRID, to identify the key active ingredients. And we went ahead to say, from our analysis, this product can do A, B, C, and D, but there is no evidence to show that it can do this. Incidentally, 2 weeks after we undertook this analysis, and the Minister of Health, Minister Hanire, and the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Secretary Boss Mustafa, went on the telly and made public our findings from NIPRID. 2 weeks later, the healthcare system in Madagascar fell apart. And if you go online, we were quoted, our analysis went viral because people were struggling to identify what was in the product. People were struggling to identify the science behind the product. And that data wasn't coming from Madagascar. So NIPRID provided the first body of evidence, the first data that said anything about that particular product. And that is the value that NIPRID brings to phytomedicinal research. So we adopt a different perspective. Our own work is underpinned by the highest level of science, international science. And I'm telling you, based on our ISO certifications, we're the first agency in this part of the world to gain both the ISO 9001 and the ISO 17025 certifications.
So that could be read in two ways.
Yeah.
The first way is that, okay, you know, whatever herbal medicine exists on the market, you know, you are able to critically analyze to see if it's able to do what it claims to be able to do, which is a good thing. On the other hand, some people will say, oh, you're only here to pull down. What exactly are you coming up with, which you think will be the cure ultimately that is herbal?
Very good point, Mark. And we don't only talk the talk. At NIPRID, we also walk the walk. We're the first agency in this part of the world to develop an anti-sickling agent from drug discovery up to phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. And based on our approach, sorry,
an anti what?
Sickling,
okay.
An anti-sickling agent.
Okay,
is used for sickle cell anemia.
Yeah.
From drug discovery through preclinical tests all the way to phase 1, phase 2, and some parts of phase 3 clinical trials. And based on our high scientific, international scientific approach, this particular product is used in 44 countries across the world. So, you know, when people say things like, well, phytomedicines, will it be accepted around the world? Will it be accepted by orthodox practitioners? Doctors prescribe this medicine because the data is there. And that's the approach that we use at NIPRID. And so for coronavirus, in addition to our analysis for COVID organics, we didn't mean, well, I mean, it's not our job to pull anybody down. In fact, for COVID organics, this is the first time I'm saying this publicly, when the findings of the analysis started coming out, I had pressure internationally and nationally not to release the results. Not to release the results.
Why? What's that?
Well, you know how it is in the community. We're the first, I don't know if other people had looked at the results, but we were about to bring out groundbreaking results for a product which across Africa, people were sending jets to Madagascar to pick up. We were lucky. I am lucky. My institute was lucky that we had bosses that believed in us. The president said, before this particular product will be used in Nigeria, take it to NIPRID. and let them do the analysis. Secretary Boss Mustafa said the same thing. The minister implemented those directives. And when he came and we did the analysis, when it wasn't looking too good and it leaked, I was threatened. But because I had the support of my bosses, we did the right thing. And thank goodness that we did. Can you imagine the amount of lives that were saved? Can you imagine the millions of dollars that were saved by our analysis? Can you imagine the shift? Because assuming all the 54 countries in Africa had just depended on that product, then we wouldn't channel the resources to other products that have potential. So this is the groundbreaking work that we did, and we went beyond that. NIPRID, for the first time in the history of the country, put together a National Scientific Advisory Committee to guide us on how to use the science to verify phytomedicinal products, made up of 20 high-class erudite professors across different disciplines, across different universities, all internationally recognized. And in December, we launched that particular format, that guideline, and it is available for everybody to use.
One of the things I just heard you say is that you wouldn't have been able to channel that energy towards other products that had potential.
Yeah.
Are there other products that have potential currently being researched, which would be able to fight the COVID-19
Yes, there are.
virus?
Yes, there are. We've received several products from the PTF. In fact, just last week, I sent a memo to back on one of those products. We've received several products from the PTF, but beyond the products that we've received for analysis from the PTF, there is a product from NIPRID itself. So one thing we pride ourselves...
Is that it?
This is it.
Niprimune.
Niprimune.
That is to boost immunity, I want to imagine.
Yes.
Not for when you have caught the virus.
Well, that is what we need to find out in the next level of research activities.
Okay.
So what we've done, and this is what we're very good at doing in NIPRID, we're very good at doing the next, getting to the next level of cutting edge science. So our focus now in NIPRID are things like nanotechnology in medicine, things like artificial intelligence and machine learning in drug discovery, things like API and excipient research.
In NIPRID?
Yes,
it sounds
in
almost difficult to believe. I mean,
let me convince you.
Without prejudice to the work that you've
I
done.
get you.
Certainly not.
I get you, but over and over again, we've demonstrated that we have world-class scientists in NIPRID.
No, not because of the scientists, but because of the equipment. Oftentimes, the personnel will be there.
Yes.
But they're often frustrated by the lack of equipment.
And I agree with you. And I agree with you on that. In fact, just a few weeks after I was appointed, one of the newspapers came in to do an interview. And when they went round, during the interview, they said, how can you say you can do all this when there is this level of dilapidation? Thank goodness I've gotten funding and I've renovated 90% of my formerly dilapidated structures. I've gotten new equipment. I've built up capacity in terms of laptops for all my staff, in terms of training, including international. I've done all that in the past 2.5 years of my appointment. But you know what I answered that particular reporter? I told them that if you look at how to run a research institute, you have the infrastructure, which is the equipment you mentioned, and then you have the personnel. That it takes 10 to 15 years to build up competent personnel. But equipment, give me 20 billion naira, I'll get world-class equipment. I will train my 75 masters and PhDs within 6 to 12 months. And the next year, we're operating as a world-class institute. That's what it is.
So right now, existing as a government, as an independent government agency, which you say is supervised by the Ministry of Health, what has been the greatest challenge to you as a research institute?
I used to think that it was funding, but in the past few weeks, I've realized that it is prioritization. So I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I was doing an interview, and before I go in for an interview, I do some reflection. And during the interview, you know, a similar question came up, and I mentioned all the things I had done in my institute, how I had used my funding to renovate, you know, the bulk of my infrastructure, you know, get new equipment, train my staff, get operational vehicles, get people moving. But then I realized that my most important achievement, right, is actually what I'm sitting here doing today, which is telling Nigerians about the criticality of research and development. We don't understand research and development as a country, and it's sad. I'm giving you evidence from decades and centuries. Unless as a country, and when I say as a country, I'm not talking about government, I'm talking about the people, I'm talking about the government, I'm talking about stakeholders, I'm talking about development partners, philanthropists, foundations, and the man on the street. Unless as a people we begin to understand what research and development means to our society, and based on that understanding begin to prioritize, Malpe will be moving round and round in circles, no development. There is no developed country, none, that does not spend as a proportion of its GDP between 1% to 5%. Nigeria is far behind a lot of countries, and this is empirical evidence. Looking at, you know, developed countries retrospectively.
So it is lack of being prioritized.
It is lack of being prioritized that prevents the funding.
Okay.
It's lack of being prioritized that prevents the funding. So I gave a press conference last week, you know, which went viral, and I started getting calls from everywhere. And then I started to wonder, how am I in this setting? What really is going on? And someone called me and said, who are funding you? And I replied, when I was appointed Director General of NIPRID, my capital budget was somewhere around 250 million, right? That is $500,000. That's $500,000 for the premier research and development institute of a country. Now, in the past 2.5 years, that has increased based on my engagement with government stakeholders. The people at the National Assembly, the people at the presidency, they get it.
Is that changing though?
It has changed. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Based on that engagement, there has been a twofold increase in my capital budget. In the COVID-19 releases, we were also prioritized. Also, I'm a big believer in cooperation, collaboration. So I've gone around to other government agencies, and I've met a few like-minded agencies who have supported us with infrastructure so that we can do collaborative research with them that will build, you know, processes for the country. So we've gotten a significant amount of support from the government side. But what we haven't seen is a corresponding reflection of that from the corporate, private sector, foundation, philanthropist side. Only PMG MAN, which is the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Group of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, that's the only Nigerian body that has given us an endowment. The other body that has given us an endowment is the government of Japan. Government of Japan gave us equipment for our nanotechnology center that's close to 6 billion. And I'll tell you what, compare this to America, where somebody like
Dr. Adigwe,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry I have to interrupt you. I'm already being wound up. I just want to ask you quickly if this is available in commercial quantities, the Nipremune which
No, it's not.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
No, it's not, because we still need funding to take it to the level where we can say categorically that it works. But our artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities has identified that this can add value. And guess what? Colleagues in Thailand who have gotten funding and moved it along have started using it for COVID-19.
Well, it's not a conversation that's ended. The pandemic is still very much with us. And even after we've left the pandemic, as you said, it's a consciousness which we have to have, that we must prioritize research and development. We have to thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Today this morning. Dr. Obi Adigwe is a DG of the National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development, NIPRID.